All right, everyone. Today, I am very excited for what I expect to be a really thoughtful conversation about leadership and social justice and all kinds of really cool things with Yamani Yansa Hernandez. I'm very, very excited to introduce you to her. She is the CEO of Groundswell Fund and Groundswell Action Fund, one of the largest funders of reproductive, gender, and racial justice organizing in the United States, directly funding nearly $200 million in grants to organizations led by women, Indigenous, Black, and transgender people of color. What makes Yamani so unique and her story so compelling isn't just the scale of the impact that she's had through the roles that she's held, but it's really her own journey. She's someone who started in public service at the age of 16 and was inspired to take action in her own community through her family and the things that they were experiencing. And she spent tons of time and the decades since sort of moving through every level of the nonprofit sector, from neighborhood organizing to national leadership. And she has been a grantee, a coach, and now a funder. And so she has this really unique perspective that's really a 360-degree view of how change actually happens. So I'm excited to talk with her about how her leadership has really transformed organizations like the National Network of Abortion Funds. They grew from 12 to 60 people and a budget from 2 million to 20. What the work that they're doing at Groundswell, how she has coached other folks from being visionaries to sort of executing against that and helping to bring people along. Yamani really embodies, I think, what it means to rewrite the rules, not just by abandoning systems, but by really reimagining them from the inside out and always centering them on the voices and experiences of the people who are most impacted. So she's a plant mom, a dog mom, and a human mom, and an artist and an introvert. So I really appreciate her making time to talk with us, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. All right. Well, for those of you who are as excited as I am about today's conversation, I'm very interested and eager to introduce you to Yamani Hernandez, doing amazing work and just in so many different spaces and really pioneering in a lot of spaces. And I'm very eager to learn from you today. So thank you so much for making time to talk with me.
Thanks for being interested in talking to me.
Yeah. So one of the things that we really typically will kick things off with in this pod is, what is it? There's a question, because I think we're so much more than our resume and our professional experience. And so the question I like to ask is, what are one or two things about you that we might not see on your resume or your CV that are true about you that you'd use to describe yourself? And when did you start to own them as true about you?
Yeah, thank you. I think, and I don't know if it's apparent from my resume, but I am artistic. I'm an artist. I sometimes say I used to be an artist, but I'm trying to get out of saying that. So yeah, I mean, sometimes people will see like I have a master's degree in architecture and they'll be like, oh, there's is there design somewhere in there? So I would use that word to describe myself as just artistic. And another word is just I'm introverted. I'm shy. And I don't think people realize that because I have been in like public facing roles and where I'm expected to be, out front and be a talking head, but I'm a pretty shy person. So that may not be apparent from my resume. Yeah.
Well, that makes me extra grateful that you've opened yourself up to conversation. I promise to respect your space, so you can tell me to back up if I need to. I'm curious how the artistic sort of nature of who you are and this introversion, how have those played out? I mean, you are in such public roles where people are in your business all the time. How do you manage that?
Uh, yeah, it's hard. It is. I feel like my roles and my leadership is like a duty and a responsibility, and so I welcome the opportunity to do good important work and but to be honest, I mean, I think it's something that I've tried to run from many times. I've tried to hide from leadership roles. I've tried to hide from being seen. I tried, and so it's kind of like a grappling. It just never works. Like when I try to put myself behind or I try to, um, be less visible, somehow it always kind of leads back to being in some kind of a role um that requires leadership. So it's been difficult sometimes, but I just try to balance it with a lot of alone time and time doing things that fill me up, creative things, things in nature, spending time with loved ones. And so, I just kind of balance like all the kind of energy going out with also putting energy in, and it works out. So, yeah.
That's good. I appreciate that because I do think that, just thinking about leadership as a whole, it is so rare that we find it's so rare historically. I will say, I feel like it is changing, that organizations will um, appreciate the leadership of someone who is an introverted human, right? Because so often it is just easier to go with the louder voice in the
Yep.
room, the more sort of gregarious energy. And I think it's been really interesting in the last few years to watch organizations like, obviously, you all are an example here, but it's pretty uncommon that people will pull back into, oh, we're going to put the Tim Cooks of the world into leadership roles, versus the Steve Jobs. And I think it's been a really interesting transition to like to find that we as we very slowly, I would like to say, in business evolve how we think about leadership, have started to move into, okay, it's okay to think about these other folks who are in the room who are that sort of quiet strength that we miss. So
Yeah.
that's really cool. How did or who did maybe find that in you and sort of say, listen, Yamani, like you kind of need to step into this.
Oh, into leadership.
Yeah.
Um, I think that I am a natural leader through let's see, what's the right way to say this? I would say two things. Like one, I think that I come from a family of people who are a very visionary, very thoughtful about change, about making social change, making, they're change makers in their own lives and their communities. And so it's something that I grew up seeing, that you don't just kind of like go along and get along. Like you figure out, you see a problem, you see things that you think should change, and then you work on them and you try to make those things change. And so that's something I saw examples of that in my parents, my grandparents, and extended family. It's just, yeah, it's kind of just like a theme in my family. And then the other thing I would say is, I mean, that's sort of like the positive side of it. And then there's the other part of it is also, it's just kind of like I had to be a leader in my family because of, trauma. And I think there's a lot of people that have stories about that, of just like, I'm good in a crisis, because I have experienced some crisis and I had to step up and, you know, move through that. And
Mm.
so that's always sort of like in the coaching experiences that I've had where I was the client, I've had coaches kind of push back on me, and be like, are you doing your are you doing your thing? Are you good going into like your childhood conditioned tendency to like step up and try to, you know, fix things, quote unquote, or are you leading from a place of like balance and like sharing the responsibility with other people, and that kind of thing. So it's both. I mean, I'm introverted, and when I say I'm introverted and shy, it doesn't mean that I don't have opinions. It doesn't mean that I, don't see problems and think they should be, solved, or that I'm not a good problem solver, because I think I'm all of those things and I see those things. It's just I don't necessarily get energy from from doing that. I find them to be pretty draining.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's like it can create imbalance for me personally. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. And in fact, I think the universe hands us conversations that we need to have when we need to have them. And a dear, dear friend of mine is an incredible leader. And just yesterday, experienced this incredible sort of trauma in her team that all of a sudden needed to be managed, right? But like you have to do the feelings for yourself and for everyone else, but there's also this management and holding space for other people. And I think that so that's where my headspace is as I'm listening to you and I'm hearing, again, I believe that what we have been through teaches us and shapes how we lead. And so that young Yamani who had these experiences of walking through trauma and like successfully managing them, right? Being able to walk into spaces where hard things happen and you have to do that for teams. It's really hard, right? And nobody teaches you how to do that.
No, it's an embodied, it's an embodied experience. You learn how to do it, and you just sort of embody that
Yeah.
strength, or yeah,
Yeah.
foresight, or yeah.
Yeah. It's, like there's a real value in having experienced those hard things, right? To be able to walk through them. So sort of on that and thinking about you as a young person, you really got started in doing hard work really early in your career. And it sounds to me, and please correct me where I'm wrong and direct us differently, but it sounds to me like you had a lot of examples in your life, in your family, of people who took on hard things and cared about what was happening around them. And so Lisette Nieves was on our podcast, and she's incredible. And she said something to me once. She's like, when you live in a city like New York, you don't get to opt out. And I was like, oh, wow, right? Like, it's just right here. She's like, when
Right
you're this
there.
close to humans, you don't get to opt out. And that
Yeah.
came to my mind as you were talking about that. And I'm curious how, as a young person, the engagement in the social, sort of the social justice things that grabbed your heart and have been hanging on to them for so long. How do you, at 16, decide that's what you're going to walk into when you start getting into your career?
Yeah. Well, there's so many stories to tell, but I think before sharing like what happened at 16, that particular age, I think I just had the example of, like, for instance, my mother is studied political science, and was like always doing something, some project in the community on our block, or was very entrepreneurial. And so, like, in the summers would just be like, oh, I would be like, oh, I want to sell Girl Scout cookies. And she'd be like, you don't have to sell Girl Scout cookies. You can make your own cookies. You can sell your own cookies. And, and so it'd be like, she started like a summer camp that was called Kid Power. And like the kids on the block came over to our porch, and we all decided on like different like businesses we were going to try to do that summer. And like I did it with my neighbor, my another kid across the street. We did these cookies. And yeah, so I just kind of like, my mom raised me in such a way that was just kind of like, you just decide to do something, and then you do it, and then you make a difference, like, and it's a choice. And so that's just kind of, it was always sort of like offered as a thing.
Yeah.
But at 16, I had a friend, like, in the neighborhood that was on his way over to visit. I grew up in the South Side of Chicago. I had a friend who was on his way over to visit, and he got shot and killed on the way to my house.
Sorry.
And it was like the first time that I really had to I think the first time I was kind of like confronted with um like not just a problem in my household or a problem with like a particular relationship or in my household or in my family, but just like in my community, like, oh, there's this bigger thing that just happened. Like it brought up all this stuff like gang violence and guns and community safety and all of these things. And it was a personal trauma, but my mom at that time um was in trying to help me move through the grief of it, and also her own grief, I guess, as a parent watching her um teenager experience that. She's just like, we're gonna do something, we're gonna organize, like we're gonna organize around gun violence. And she ended up running for alderman in Chicago, like on a platform of like community safety and gun violence prevention. And we did this memorial project where we um, like tied green ribbons around trees. That was his favorite color. And we put these little, signs with his name and its story. And that was kind of like my first organizing project, I guess. And then it kind of just kept going from there. Like, in school, they would be like, oh, we have, this public service project where you can go volunteer with, other students and do mentoring or tutoring. And, I kind of just started just picking up stuff after that, like doing, I guess you could call it service work, public service work. But yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I'm super interested in your mom as a human being too. Like that's a whole separate podcast, I'm sure. But I love that she was like, all right, let's do something about this. Um, kind of thinking about that and like that transition into community engagement, for lack of a better term, right? Or like social justice as a real thing.
Yeah.
Um, you have such a unique blend of experiences because of the roles that you've had, that this position that you sit in now as a funder, right, and helping organizations achieve goals by partnering with them and coming alongside them to grow. But you've got this perspective of like the grassroots version, the sort of, okay, maybe small nonprofit, then the very large nonprofit, and I was funded and now I'm funding. Like the Venn diagram of that is very unique, but also really pretty powerful, right? To be able to lead those organizations differently and think about their growth differently. I'd be curious what, from your perspective, what you think the impact of having been on the other side as a grant recipient, right, fundee, has
Yeah.
changed about how you lead the organization who is now partnering with these others to help grow them and drive their success.
Yeah. Thank you. That is a great question. And I think it's something I'm still new. Well, I consider myself still new in my role. I've been here about 2.5 years. So maybe it's not brand new, but I'm new to being in a leadership role within philanthropy. So I'm still kind of learning um, how to make sense of that Venn diagram. And I don't want anything that I say to sound like I've like totally figured it
Mhm.
out, because I think it's very much in process and trying to figure that out. But I think probably the one of the bigger themes is just one of my entry level positions was at a family foundation. I was only there for a short time, but they had a tagline that was said, it's a partnership, not a power trip. And I think that grant making, yeah, it was like grant making is a partnership, not a power trip. And I do think that I've experienced both both of those things in grant making relationships. I've definitely experienced the folks who do treat it like a power trip, and they make you want to jump through 80 million hoops. And it's very much about like um yeah, like holding the power over you, I guess, as a grant maker, versus I think what Groundswell, where I work and lead, is very much about like partnership of like, we're not trying to be on a power trip about the fact that we're giving a grant. Like it's not our money. We raised it, we're a public foundation, so we raise every dollar that we give away. And yeah, we're just like a conduit. We're trying to be in solidarity. And that is like part of the frame that we're really trying to embrace now is like movement solidarity. It's not just about like who's giving and who's receiving, but like who's showing, like we're just showing up for each other in different ways. And if we have financial resources or training or other things that we can support, that's just a partner. That's just being a partner to all the other work that grantee partners are doing, their organizing work and, their direct action, their mutual aid all of that. It's just like you put the two things together and you get, movement. And yeah, that's kind of how I think about it. I try to put myself in the shoes of folks who are doing the things that we ask them to do if we ask them to do it.
Mhm.
And I'm, kind of constantly pushing back on like, why do we have to, ask folks to do that? And I do think that's not just like unique to me. I think there's a shift happening in philanthropy more broadly where folks are just like, why, especially people who take like a reparations frame um in their giving of just like this wealth didn't even doesn't belong to the people who have it and have hoarded it, so it definitely should be given freely and without a lot of restrictions, and let folks do what they need to do with it. Yeah.
Huh, Yamani. Now I'm like, okay, that's the rabbit trail I want to I want to take. But I'll try to stay focused because there's a lot there. How do you So this philosophy that you've embraced, that you're working towards, right, and developing for yourself as a leader, how do you was that already in Groundswell's culture? Is that something that like was there partly and you're sort of infusing your own thing into it? And how are you try to be really practical about leadership here and like how do you help bring your team along if that isn't where they've come from, or isn't the perspective that they necessarily had prior to your leadership?
Yeah. I would say that I would say much of it is part of just how Groundswell started. It was meant to be an intervention in philanthropy, meaning that doing philanthropy differently, having prioritizing women of color and gender expansive color of leaders of color, and also giving in places that were less popular to give. Like we focus on the South and the Midwest in our giving, and because those are the places that are most impacted by political repression. And you see a lot of other foundations that are like, oh, it's a lost cause there, so we're not giving there. So instead, we're like, no, we're still giving there. That stability is really important.
Yeah.
And but I will say that there's some, I was a grantee of Groundswell for 10 years at two different organizations before I came to the helm of Groundswell. And there were things that are changing under my leadership. There was a lot of heavy emphasis on evaluation, and that it was for a reason. I'm not saying that in a critical way. Like I think the earlier years in Groundswell, we really had to make the case for like why the investment in women of color leadership, trans people of color, was like there's a return on the investment. We had to say, well, this number of policies were changed and these were the number of people that were impacted and this is the number of people that, and now I think we've just moved to a different place where like it's already evident. Like we don't need to make the case.
Mhm.
And also so many other people fund women of color leaders, trans people of color, not enough, but more than used to. And so now it's more about the relationship. We're trying to get the money to folks, but we don't necessarily need to badger them about every little, evaluation point to make it um, to give a justification for why they deserve the money or why the money was used well. Like it's just kind of like all this reporting, and it puts more barriers on grantee partners. So we just moved away from that, and people call it trust-based philanthropy, where, it's just kind of like, we trust you, we have a relationship with you, we know, that you know best how to use this funding to benefit your community and to move to advance your mission. So here it is, and you know, let's stay in touch. Let's continue to support you in other ways, lift up your voices, and it's just that's kind of a shift. I think the other thing you asked was just like, how do you bring people along? And I will say that we have always prioritized hiring organizers, people from the organizations and movements that we serve. So that is also a little bit of a difference in, how we approach the work. So I think if anything, like our staff is more, we don't have to necessarily bring them along on, the sort of power dynamics. I think they even push us as leaders to do more, to be more. And that's what they're supposed to do as organizers anyway. So
Yeah, I love that. That's good. Um, so, interestingly, like I'm also based in the Midwest. I live in Omaha, Nebraska. My co-founders are from Chicago. And so we're local, right? We're feeling the corn sweat right now,
Yeah.
for sure. But I'm curious in thinking about philanthropy and giving, it's really interesting. I actually have found, I've been in Omaha about 12 years now, though I was born in South Dakota. I haven't lived there for 35 years ish, but I was born there. So this is in my blood for sure. And there are, in particular in Omaha, there are some really amazing family offices and folks who are really engaged in doing philanthropy work intelligently, I think, and moving towards many of the same things that you're talking about, like which I really appreciate. I'm curious, in your experience, when I talk to, for instance, VCs and things like that are on the coast, there is a very different way of engaging with organizations um, in those areas than in the Midwest. And I'd be curious. There's some really great organizations in our space that are kind of doing something that is specific to the region, that is specific to people who are from here, serving here, et cetera. I'd be curious if you could, for people who aren't familiar, who aren't from here, um, what are some of the differences that you see in doing philanthropy work in the Midwest or the South versus in some of the other areas of the country where we tend to, our brains kind of go to, right? Or there's your very large family offices or very large funds. It is different than it is here. I'd be curious if there's anything that you would call out as for points of awareness for those of us who are not familiar.
Oh gosh, that's an interesting question. I mean, I work remotely in our offices remotely, and we consider ourselves to be national, even though we kind of focus our funding in the South and the Midwest. Um, I do think that there's definitely like wealth concentrated on the coast, the East Coast and the West Coast. And so I end up spending a good amount of time fundraising in those spaces. And I don't know that I've picked up all of you know, the nuances across, from the Midwest to the coast. I think more generally, like apart from philanthropy, I think the Midwest and South tend to be a lot more authentic relational places. That's just been my personal experience.
Right.
Just culturally, it's a place where people say hello and, people, kind of remember details about families and, interests and all of those things. But those are also fundraising strategies and, anyway. So like on the coast, you have to, any donor relationship, you need to kind of pay attention to people in order to remain in relationship with them, especially a financial one. But it's interesting that you mentioned the like VC stuff because I did like a social impact. I don't know what it's called, like a pitch, like where you go and pitch to like socially focused VC people, venture capital people, and I was one of the few people that didn't have a product to pitch. Like most people is like, oh, I'm bringing this new diaper to the market, or I'm bringing this new, and ours was really just about, this was in my previous role, it was really just about like, you should invest just because you should invest. Um, and it was a harder sell. People were like, that was nice. But like, what do I get? What do I get back from it?
Yeah.
I'm like, you get to feel like you
Feel
did a
good.
really good thing. And get to know that you like helped solve this problem. So it's just, that is like an interesting space that I haven't spent a lot of time in. And I think that people think of it as like another do-gooding, like a place to do good, but it's still very much about like capitalism, like, making money, profit, and all of those things. And I haven't really reconciled that with like how that interfaces with like philanthropy for the sake of um just helping and doing good. But
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a tough space. I mean, I have, and interestingly, the older I get, so I'm almost 50, I'm 49, and embracing it and loving every second of it. Um, and I also find that I have, you know, I care less about a whole lot of other things, right? You settle into yourself and into what matters in this very different way. And that's very real, right? And part of that is, your brain's not even done cooking till you're 27 years old. If you're a young man, typically, with lots of testosterone pumping through your body and those types of things. But, um, coming up on 50, um, I think about the difference between like capitalism works for cultures and I want to say more for societies, right? And then this balance of the network, that social fabric piece of it coming to the importance of that, right? And those things can sometimes really feel like they're um, in contrast to one another, but the reality is like when they work together, right, we see so much incredible impact. And there has been this movement, right? There are B Corps and, all these different ways where business and social justice have kind of come together. And there are so many pluses and minuses about it, right? Like it's still an experiment. And I think one of the challenges, I'd love to get your take on this, is that we often, I think on the corporate side of things, to your point around needing to make the case that it works, there are particular organizations who've done a great job of that. That's really, they're leading forward with that. We see that culture in this country in particular is really wanting to embrace and lean into. People want to shop with places where they feel like their
Right.
values
With
are
values. Yeah.
recognized, and they want to work in those places. And so there's a business case, right? The business case is made. And then at the same time, like we also know that more forward facing, more diverse companies, places where we value the humans and the work that we're doing, do better financially. So we know that there are all these wins, and yet there is still this underlying like historical approach that we've had that sort of needs to be unpacked. And we're really not very good in the US, I don't think, at like looking at the past and unpacking it, owning it, apologizing, recognizing we've maybe made a mistake, and then like giving grace, right? It's like that. We haven't figured out that equation, in my opinion, just yet. And so I'm curious, as the work that you're doing, that balance between that balance between those things. That was a very big question, but I'm curious what your thoughts are between how those things come together in your world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're solidly in the like nonprofits and philanthropic space, so not too much into like the like corporate or business space. But um, I think one of the things I was picking up from what you were just kind of describing is, I think it's not just the past, it's the present. I mean, one of the bigger problems that we're navigating is the concentration of billionaires, in this country, and them not doing their their fair share, and like the fact that you just don't get to be a billionaire without exploiting people. It's not just about like, you know, uh, an idyllic version of capitalism that is like, everybody does their part and, you know, quote unquote pulls themselves up by their bootstraps and makes their money and decides how they want to, if they want to be values aligned in their companies. Like to be a billionaire, you have to have exploitative business practices. And yeah, like this is one of the tensions within philanthropy, that is widely talked about, is like the payout. It's not necessarily applicable to us because we're a public foundation. We raise the money that we give away, but for private foundations that, um, have amassed wealth through generational wealth or through, exploitation. Um, if you're only required by law to give 5% of you know, your wealth, um, but there's these, you're just like continuing to amass wealth, like, and the little 5% is just kind of like it's really like a tax benefit. It's not, it's under the guise of like, you want to do something, really helpful to folks, but the balance of like how much wealth is still continuing to be amassed and how much is being given away is like pretty imbalanced, and the burdens that are put on the people that have to seek that 5% are often imbalanced as well. So like you're making people jump through all of these hoops to get this tiny bit of like this bigger pot of money that, could be redistributed in such a way that still lets you be wealthy, but also spreads it around, so that everybody gets to feel the benefits of safety, security, food, housing, and so yeah, it's just I don't know how much, I don't know if it was a question or like just kind of like a, reflection, but yeah, that's kind of how I think about some of those things. And one of the tricky things that it feels hard to be like in a philanthropic space because I don't come from generational wealth, and I don't work at I don't work at a private foundation. So, it feels very much like an extension of what I've always been doing, which is like raising, money, raising awareness, and then trying to spread it around. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you, and yes, it was more of a reflection on the things. So thank you for that. Very interestingly, I was listening to Simon Sinek the other day talking about, who's driving a great conversation, has been for years in this country and globally about why are you doing what you're doing, and it was really interesting. He was talking about, I've had these conversations with very wealthy people who are making they're giving money, they're, contributing, they're being philanthropists. But he's like, it's really interesting to me, like there does seem to be a divide that comes with certain things. He's like, folks who sort of identify with this sort of more masculine piece of themselves say, I'm an investor. And folks who sort of lean more into the feminine are like, I'm a philanthropist. Right. And he's like, it's really interesting to me because the way that they then talk about it is when they're investing, there are these expectations for the folks for whom they've given these dollars. And to your point earlier, the requirements around reporting and performance of the programs and things like that.
Yeah.
And really wanting to make sure that like I'm giving my money to an organization that's going to work really hard and do really great things. And on the other side, he's like, and he's speaking specifically from his own experience. Then I'm talking to these folks and it's more like, I'm giving this money because these people are already doing great work. I don't think they're going to run off to Kenya with my dollars, right? Like they're doing the work they want to be doing, unless of course they're working in Kenya. But like, and so there's just this very different kind of expectation around what that giving looks like. So it just, as you were talking about that, how people who are in the space, who have the capacity to give in these very large volumes, we'll say. Um, it was interesting to me to hear him say, oh, investment versus
Yeah.
philanthropy, and even the language around that, right? It kind of ties back to some of those things. So thank you for letting me go there. It's been something I've been
Sure.
thinking about for a few days. I'm curious. So recently you moved from it at Groundswell from interim CEO to sort of permanent CEO, which is new for them, but also obviously new for you. I'm curious if there is, in this leadership perspective, um, is there anything that you're doing differently as a permanent CEO? Let's put that in quotes, right?
Yeah.
Versus being in that interim role.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll just back up a little bit. I led the National Network of Abortion Funds for about 7 years. And at the time that I was leaving there, I was like, I will never lead again. That was when I was like, I'm gonna be a coach. I went to the management center and I was just like, I am more than happy to be in a background role, supporting leaders from behind the scenes. And when I was invited to come in as an interim, I really was just like, oh, okay, this is an extension of my coaching work. It's going to be still sort of like, I'm going to get in there and get out. It's still going to be sort of like background. Like I'm going to um, go help and support, this transition and, and get out of the way for the next person who will come and lead. And so the intern work was really internally focused. It was really about like operational systems, and we were negotiating our first union contract, and just a lot of internal things. And I think the biggest shift from interim to the quote unquote permanent role is just kind of face out more outwardly. We talked earlier about just the expectations of leadership are that you are out in the public, you're seen publicly, that people know who you are, they know, hear your voice, and that, they hear your marching orders, or the things that your visions, or the things that you think should happen in the world, and like, are called to ask other people to sort of join on to. And so that's just a shift that I'm like very actively inside of it. It's why I said yes to this podcast interview. It's just, you can't just sit internally and well, you can, but there's consequences. So I'm just trying to shift my attention more to being seen publicly, sharing publicly about the things that I think and believe, and about leadership and otherwise, and also meeting with donors, um, and yeah, like raising money. Like I think in the interim role, it was really more about like, let me try to rebuild the staff, let me do hiring, let me put infrastructure in place. Now I've done, we have staff in place, and um, it's just about kind of shifting my attention to thought leadership and fundraising, and some of the more public facing things.
Yeah, the things that are exhausting for some of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Required and necessary and important. And um, well, sort of on that note, I'm curious if there's anything today that I haven't asked you about that I should have, or anything that you'd like to talk about before we end that we haven't discussed yet.
Oh gosh. Well, I don't know that I've talked a lot about Groundswell. I'm happy to
Please.
talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
our work. We are a public foundation that has in 20 years given about $200 million away to grassroots organizations that focus largely on reproductive justice, but also on racial justice, gender justice, healing justice. Um, and I'm really proud of our grantee partners. We have 250 grantee partners across the United States, and across our C3 and our C4. They would do things ranging from birth justice to abortion access to trans justice, to healing justice work, and they do electoral justice. And it's just, it's been, we were recently rated one of the best funding intermediaries by our grantee partners, which was just
Kind of
really
nice.
heartening to read their quotes, about our work that were unsolicited from us. And it's been a hard time to fundraise. A lot of philanthropic dollars are shrinking right now. People are scared, of the political environment, and so I'm happy that Groundswell still exists. I am still here, and we are shifting our portfolio right now to do deeper, higher levels of giving with smaller group of grantees, and I'm excited about that because people need more, than we've been able to give, and so we might not be able to give everything to everybody, but we are really trying to rescale our money so that we can make the biggest impact possible. So,
I love that.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing about that. Can you just for people who aren't in the world, what does healing justice mean? Can you give us
Oh,
some
yeah.
context for that?
Sure. Yeah. It means like healing justice with a political agenda. I mean, it means healing with a political agenda. So like not just like self-care, like going to get pedicures and manicures, but like doing somatic body work and trying to allow ourselves to do things like grieve and heal and feel some of the both the highs and the lows of what it means to be in this work. It means interpersonal. It means like working on interpersonal relationships and conflict, navigating conflict. Some of the struggles in our movement aren't just like external, political struggles, but our own internal interpersonal issues. So it means actually taking money and time and investing in strengthening our skills to actually be in generative conflict with each other and disagree with each other and move through it without having to destroy our relationships or destroy our organizations. So so it's kind of like a politicized, it's like not just like self-care for the sake of beauty and like yeah, surface level things, but trying to care for ourselves and our communities and our people. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I'm some of many of those words are much more familiar than others, and
No,
so
I
I appreciate
appreciate.
the
Yeah,
extra
I
context.
mean,
That's
we're
good.
a movement. I think social justice is like a movement of jargon. There's
Yeah.
like a lot of jargon. And yeah, I always welcome the opportunity to just unpack something and like not contribute to that problem.
Well, thank you. And it is really hard right now. I mean, because everything does feel political and
Yeah.
everything does feel hard. And just had this great conversation with Megan Onan a couple of weeks ago, and about having hard conversations with people that you love. And so this engagement around it's not okay just to agree to disagree, right?
Yeah.
Like we have to get through the thing. Um, and we don't all have those skills, right? Like when you can't name what your feelings are, or
No.
anger is like a primary emotion for you, which it's totally not. It's a secondary emotion, and you don't have
Yeah.
language to talk about why you
Yeah.
feel that way. It becomes much more difficult. So I think that sort of healing work and um, being able to maybe if it's starting with really young kids, right? Because sometimes us old folks that we're harder to lead to water to get them to drink, but teaching how to think about your emotions and understanding how your body is connected to your spirit and your emotions and the way
Yeah.
you walk through the world and those types of things. So I love that y'all are doing that. So,
Good.
well, we will be as supportive to you as possible. So what does that look like from our community if people want to support what Groundswell is doing, if they want to connect with you directly, how would they go about doing that?
Sure. I mean, you can look for me on LinkedIn. That's pretty much my only social media. Yamani Yansa Hernandez. And then Groundswell Fund. We are also on LinkedIn. We're on Instagram, and Facebook and Blue Sky. And obviously our website, groundswellfund.org, and Groundswell Action Fund, which is our C 501c4 that supports electoral work. So just joining our newsletter, following us on social media. You can always donate if called to do that. But those are lots of ways to. Oh, and we also have a partnership with Ms. Magazine. We
Oh,
have Groundswell and Ms. Magazine, where we lift up the stories and thought leadership of our grantee partners. So you can just Google that and go to that site and read all of the op-eds that folks have uploaded there and get inspired.
I love it. That's awesome.
Thank
All
you.
right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you allowing me to meander and reflect as well as ask some questions. So thank you for that. And keep up the good work. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's important. It's
thank
important.
you. And
So
thank you for your work with sharing stories and having people. I think this is a way that we understand each other's humanity, and instead of like reading some talking points or talking head, on the news, like digging into people's stories is really essential to people learning how to be with each other and, hopefully not being in so much conflict. So thank you for doing that work as well.
absolutely. All right. Thank you,
Take
Yamani. I
care.
really appreciate it. All
All right.
right.
You too. Okay, bye.